You must have found
Good evening, everybody. We are live with Dr. Juliette Engel. And, we've done a lot on MK Ultra on this channel. Kathy O'Brien, brilliant. Juliette Engel, right up there at the tip of the spear in terms of research, depth, scope, personal experience, you name it. So, an absolutely fantastic speaker. I've been watching Juliette's other work, and it is mind-blowing. So we're about to do a deep dive, folks. So get ready. And in terms of qualifications, Dr. Engel is a former medical doctor, humanitarian, survivor of government-run emergency-based mind control programs. Trained in the US, lived in Russia, founded the MiraMed Institute, where she worked with human transported women and kids, ultimately uncovering deep ties between elite SA rings, including Epstein, which we're going to talk about, and covert intelligence operations. This is right up our streets. Huge thank you for coming on. Is there anything you'd like to add to that intro?
No, I'm still a doctor. So this is former doctor. I think I'm still a doctor.
Shame.
But I'll add that I'm 76 years old, so I've been at this for a long time. So there's a lot to talk about, and I think it might give me a little overview of this whole bunch of rabbit holes that are poking up through the ground.
So if some of the viewers are not going to be familiar with MK Ultra, let's just set the table a bit. And could you give your definition of it, please?
I will. And I want to tell everybody before I start that as of December 23rd, 2024, the CIA admitted to all of it. And Shaun's going to show you the documents in a little bit here. But MK Ultra is a program that was started in 1953 by the Dulles brothers, by Sidney Gottlieb, by people from the CIA, NSA, which included my own uncle. And what they did is they were all in Nuremberg together, and they realized that they didn't want to waste this amazing experience that the Nazi scientists had in the concentration camps. And they were particularly interested in the progress. They were the first Americans to get hold of all the Nazi documents, and they were all German speakers, fluent, read all the materials, and realized that the Nazis were way ahead in terms of developing mind control and control over populations. And this is what that little group in the CIA wanted. They wanted present and future control over the population of the United States. So they began bringing the Nazi scientists to the United States through Project Paperclip. And I think this is all pretty well documented also. And they didn't bring one or two, they brought thousands. So these people were brought in, given new identities, new names. They were assimilated into American neighborhoods, American culture. And now we're like 3 generations out where probably the descendants don't even know that they are the descendants, but they are. And what they did immediately in 1953, so Project Paperclip worked from about 1947 to the early 50s. 1953, they got a official or unofficial approval because MK Ultra was completely illegal. Because it subjected American citizens to torture, SA, I forget all the code words.
SA, the R word, all those horrific, traumatic things.
All the awful things that were completely illegal to do. And so it was all done sort of under the table with gentlemen's agreements and little notes to each other. And so by 1955, I was 6 years old, sorry. And my father sold me into the program. It was a ritual ceremony, and I was made to watch him take the money, and then he watched as I was SA'd. And that was my entry into the MK Ultra program. And it's kind of interesting. So I was one of the first. So I think at that time, there were probably very few. And the criteria for going in as a bloodline, which is my qualification, was that you had family. So the family, my uncles, my father, my great grandfather, were all OSS agents, Templars. What's the other ones? Oh, the Masons, Freemasons, Rosicrucians. They were all Shriners, so they were top level Masons, and so that was how I was taken in and started into the program. And at that time, that's who was in there, and every annex that I was ever sent to, these were in the documents. They're called CIA safe houses. But for us children, they were referred to annexes. We had a Dr. Green who always had a German accent. We had a Dr. White, we had a Dr. Brown, and we had Nanny Blacks who were androgynous, hermaphroditic people. You never knew if they were men or women in long black robes. And incidentally, they show up. So when you watch these bizarre rituals and things like the opening of that tunnel in Switzerland or the 2012 Olympics, you'll see all these characters. They will be there. So I was raised half the time with my own family and half the time being subject to experimentation and trained basically as a spy. And that involved segmenting my mind. It's called dissociative identity disorder, but it's not a disorder. It's actually what they did to, this is a technique they learned from the Germans to create so much horror and so much fear and so much suffering that a child will wall that off, will block it off, and will actually even be difficult for them to access it later, which is why people who've been through the program, their main symptom is that they do not remember their childhoods. And that's exactly what happened to me. So I was going through that. And interestingly, Jeffrey E., can I say his name? Or
Yeah, you can say his name now. Everyone's talking about him again.
Well, he was born in 1953. And I think he shows a lot of signs of having been in that early program. And certainly he has the pedigree for it. And I did meet him about 30 years later, and I'll tell you about that. So that is the background. And MK Ultra, MK stands for Mein Kampf. It's based on the actual book that Hitler published in Germany in the 1930s. And it was taken by Alan Cranston, who became a senator and a candidate for president, was a student in Germany at that time. And he took the book and translated it into English. It completely changed everything. So it went from a 300,000 word tome, which had collected mythology and all kinds of history and interesting things that the Germans had been collecting for years and years, including the entire Temple of Pergamon. I mean, they went to Turkey in the 1930s and took it because in Revelation, it was described as the seat of Satan, and they wanted that. So right now, it's in Berlin, and it's in a museum on Museum Island, which has been closed for years, but I know they conduct rituals and they do use it. So anyway, Alan Cranston translated Mein Kampf into a sort of a comic book version, and it was 70,000 words, and it became an intelligence operation to get this book out everywhere. So they very quickly put it into periodicals and sent it out, sold it for very cheaply, and published nearly 1 million copies and got it everywhere so that people would accept this is what Hitler had said. Hitler read it and was furious because it wasn't at all what he'd written. And he took Alan Cranston and Stackpole Publishing to court, in an American court, and won. Sued them for mistranslation and fraud, and won the case in an American court. But then the war came, and the Stackpole translation is now the only thing you can get. And I've been trying to find the original. I know that Alan Cranston had one because I was associated with him later. And but we can't get that, so we don't know the real basis for what they were using. But it came out of that, and a lot of mythology, and the idea of teletransportation, and remote viewing, both in place and time, and extra dimensionals, and having contact with different beings in different dimensions. So that was all part of the training in the MK Ultra. And so that was my childhood. And I
Juliette?
escaped at the age of 17, and had gotten myself into the University of Washington, and went to Seattle through a series of circumstances, and didn't remember for another 20 years anything that had happened. Nothing. And I only started to remember when I had my little child. You've got your little son that looks just like you. Well, I had a little daughter that looked just like me, and I was trying to like gather wisdom from my experience. My experience was horrible. So that's I'll I don't keep talking. I'll let you ask me questions or whatever.
Yeah, we've got tons of questions. And viewers, if you've got questions, put them in the chat. I will star them, and we will get to them. So Juliette, is it too traumatic to, say what these memories were that first surfaced all those years later? Is that something you don't want to revisit, or is it okay to?
It's okay because I've done it. It took me 10 years to get to the point where I could talk about it, because of my fear of being triggered. And so the last it's kind of strange. I kept trying to tell people, but I was very blocked. And when you have this programming in your head, the first thing you hit is a suicide program. And this is some reason that I've been talking a lot to people now, is that people, now that those documents are out, and now that you can no longer deny that the government did this on a huge basis, and there's probably up to 300,000 Americans walking around with this program in their head, the first thing that will happen is you will hit a suicide program, and people will commit suicide for absolutely no reason. It will make no sense to anyone. They just do it. And you're seeing that. You see that when people start speaking out, even though they're being listened to and not being criticized, they will commit suicide. And it's the program. So I've been working with Kathy O'Brien on how to seize that program before it takes hold of you, and how you keep the memories. If you just let the doors open, which is what I did in my 30s, they all come at you at once. So this flood of horror associated with you that you can't relate to anything or any kind of reality comes at you. And that I nearly committed suicide. But I had set myself, I had enough intuition, probably my medical training, that I had some help lined up. And I went to a psychiatrist that I trusted. I told him all this stuff was happening and asked him if I was crazy. And he said, "Nah, you're a hyperachiever. You don't know your own limits. You do too much, yada, yada, yada." And I couldn't disagree with that. And he said, "But you're not crazy." So, and then he said, "So tell me about your mother." I had no memory of my mother. I still don't have any memory of my mother. So that's, but I've been able to take blocks of time. So I took when I was 10 years old, we were living in Imperial Beach, California, which is as close as you can get to Mexico and still be in the United States. And our apartment looked out over the Tijuana sewer, which is open sewage that floods once or twice a year. And that's where the immigrants start coming over. As soon as it gets dark, people start coming over, and everything happens there in those tidelands. So for a year, I was there riding my bicycle we had a gang. We pretended we were Scottish kids in the Highlands of Scotland, and it was all very beautiful. And so my life focused around the open sewer pit, which is, I think, called a waterlands or something now, but it's still a sewer pit. And that was actually the happiest year of my childhood. And when you read it, you go, "Oh my God, what were the other ones like?" And I haven't gotten to all the other ones. I just recently gotten to one that I spent many times going down to Tijuana and Rosarita Beach, and then they would just turn the kids loose for weeks at a time in our underpants running around the beach. And every night, all kinds of people would come down, lots of foreign people, and Pat Brown, the governor of California, and Alan Cranston, the senator, and who was sort of my handler. And those are the only two I could really name. And they would do rituals at night. We would contact extraterrestrials. Everybody was on drugs, so how realistic any of this was. And I was 7 years old and 8 years old. And my hair got so matted in 2 weeks of just living like a savage that it had to be shaved off. And I started to remember it because I was talking to J.J. Carroll. If you know him, he used to be a Border Patrol agent there in Imperial Beach. So he triggered a memory in me of coming over the border with my parents, who had to come and get me after this 2 weeks of horror. And they came down. They'd left me there, little white girl with a suitcase. They came down. They had a brown savage with stuck wild hair and no suitcase. Nobody knew where any of my clothes were. So my father had to put his shirt on me, so he had no shirt. So then we're driving back across the border. 3 white people, my mother, my father, my brother, my father with no shirt on, and me with his shirt on in the back seat, looking like a feral child. So they pointed at me and said, "Who is that? Who's that in the back seat?" And my father looked at me like he'd never, ever seen me before in my life. He couldn't remember my name, my birth date. And I could see the wheels turning in his head. I thought, he's going to leave me here. And I'm not wrong. He was thinking that. And my mother didn't say anything. She would have gone along with anything. And so I started talking. So I took over as the adult. And from then on, that was the relationship between my parents and myself. I was a 7-year-old adult trying to control my own life, my own destiny, and be aware of what was going on. So that's the 2 blocks of time. I remember some things from earlier. I remember some procedures, and I've been working with other MK Ultra survivors to relate the meanings of those procedures, and actually some are universal. So everyone that was in the program, no matter where you were in the country, you would go through procedures that would start creating the segmentation of your mind. And I definitely have the dissociative identity problem in that I can't always get to where I want to get to in my own head. But on the other hand, it's hugely, hugely useful. Like they used it to train us to pass lie detector tests, because you would just move into another segment of yourself that had no connection to whatever it was you were caught doing. So, anyway, so 70 years later, it starts to wear off. So, and that was in the 50s. So 1959 was when I was 10 in Imperial Beach. And then, and now I'm 76 and I'm meeting up with other people. I don't think most people that were in the program survived mentally intact or at all. But there are others, and there are others that I'm sure will be talking to you that you may not even realize are MK Ultra yet, because they have been very successful. But I think it wears off in your 70s to a large extent. So, and looking back at all this racket about Epstein, I mean, he's one little tiny part of an enormous problem. One little piece, and I'm sure that he became involved in the program in much the same way I did, since he has the same sort of pedigree. But he's one of hundreds, and you look at what was done to the children of the elites, is what they considered us all. So we were the bloodlines. We were the future leaders of America. They wanted us to give up our souls, and that was a lot of what the MK Ultra programming was about: the dissociation, the torture, the sadistic abuse, the constant running you down, telling you you're worthless and damaged goods. And it didn't end at the annex. I mean, my family continued this, and they do to this day. I am treated like a dog in my own family. I mean, I think they're better to their dogs, actually. But so it's their programming. You know, I was the sacrifice, so they didn't expect me to live. So they never planned college education. They never planned. They resented buying me clothes. They wouldn't buy me books. So I mean, they figured I was basically dead and gone at 21. So, but the extraction of the soul is a huge part of what this was about. And so if they were satisfied that you were someone who had given up your soul, that had given up all moral values or any connection to God, to spirituality, to caring for other human beings, if you lost all empathy, then you were on the golden ticket. And I think that's people like Epstein and a lot of other people. So who's protecting him? Who used him? Who pleasured themselves by SA of children, and see nothing wrong with it. To this day, they see nothing wrong with it. It's a and when you think of the scale of it, in 1976, when the church hearings were held, it was the first time they looked at how much of this was going on in the United States. They had 150 running programs in 80 American institutions, and each of those programs had sub-programs which didn't require any accountability, financial or program-wise. So they say. So they got up in Congress and said, "There's no record. We know it's a lot. We know it's a lot of places." So in 1976, they theoretically closed down MK Ultra entirely. However, they signed into existence the Senior Executive Service. And I think that it just sort of went right into there, that you took the successful graduates who would have been the absolute opposite of me, that would be the people that could kill, could torture, could lie, could cheat, and not have any moral qualms about it. They accelerated those into the government. So there they are, you know. People that are my peers are now running this country, and the ones that were selected to do it were picked because they're moral voids. So they're not going to respond. And so they look at Jeffrey Epstein as, okay, just keep everything focused on him, on him, on him. But he is one of hundreds. and the responsibility is huge, diffuse, involves thousands of people, and they don't see anything wrong with it. And if you look at the senior executive service, they used to have a website. I think they've changed it all now, but they used to have a website. You can go the way back machine, see their website where they actually brag about the fact that they run 75 American government agencies. And that's true. And they are unaccountable. They're given salaries that way exceed the norms. You look at people like McCabe and Strzok and all these people that you couldn't fire from the FBI. Well, you couldn't fire them because they're senior executive service, and they're untouchable, and they have no morals, no qualms. The money's everything, and so we're in a quandary. But zeroing in on just Epstein is what they want us to do, because it's a much bigger problem.
And we appreciate you alerting us to the big picture, Juliette. So, I've still got quite a few questions. One of them is, you mentioned procedures. What did you mean when you said procedures?
Well, they had all kinds of, if you're interested, the best thing to do is read my book, Sparky, Surviving Sex Magic, because I describe some of them in there. But I'm not going to give everybody enough detail about anything that they would actually go and try some of this, because it's real. The demons that you summon are real. They stick with you. You shouldn't try this, especially if you don't have a sound foundation in your own spiritual self. And this is why young children are so susceptible to this, and teenagers, because they aren't solidly grounded inside themselves. But every session began with a session on the wheel, and it was being tied horizontally to a wheel, and the wheel had various symbols and markings on it that had always different things that they had taken out of the MK Ultra book. They would spin the wheel horizontally while people around the wheel would say horrible things about me, and then start chanting, "There is no day, there is no night, there is no light, there is no dark, there's no man, no woman, no good, no bad," no, on and on and on. And what that does is it breaks everything that as a child you can hold on to. You can't say this is good if there is no good. There's no day, there's no night, there's no light, there's no dark, and on. And when you're spinning, disoriented, and they're also like telling you you're useless, you're worthless, we're not going to keep you. And I knew they were capable of killing. They did that. And at the point where you just can't grasp it anymore, they shout, "There is green." And that moment, you're supposed to see a green flash come out of your head. And that's the giving up of your soul. And that's what I was told. So my whole concentration during that whole time was to hold on to my soul, because a soul can't be taken, it has to be given. So if you don't give up your soul voluntarily, they can't take it. They can terrify you, and extraction of the soul is what they're trying to do. And that's apparently their formula for perpetual youth, is to get the child who's undergoing the torture and the terror to give up their soul. So that's what they're pounding into this poor tortured child that they're going to kill anyway, and they want the soul before the child dies. And that's why the stuff is so expensive. $250,000 for a vial of
Yeah, we know what you're saying.
Yeah, and I was just reading about the fact that the Russians have formed a a task force to look for labs where this is being done in Russia and Ukraine and former Soviet republics, and they've been finding them, and also in Syria. And so they've been rescuing those children and um, gathering up big batches of the substance, which they're now doing genetic testing on. And the Russians publish all this on their United Nations and their Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, and they have a Chrome task force which publishes the results. And they're absolutely convinced that we are completely run by demons, and that they hired, actually Ukraine hired Marina Abramovich to be their head of their Chrome program and to market it in Hollywood, which is their big market. So there we are. How do you explain this? I mean, I've been right there with it, and I can't explain it. I don't see any reason for it, really.
You've
Do
got a
you?
question that pertains to what you're talking about. So, is it possible to get the soul back after that, as you clearly did?
Well, I never gave mine up. I was holding onto that from the moment my father sold me, and I sort of realized that I was on my own, and I just held on really tight. But I believe that it is, and I think it is possible for a wounded soul to heal. I think that people that we're seeing in positions of power who are just absolutely soulless, I don't think there's any hope for them. But there are, in that 300,000 people, you've got 10,000 at the top, only top because top in terms of ruling other people, governors and Congress, military industrial compacts, weapons makers, all these people that have to have no conscience. So they don't. But under that, there's probably 290,000 wounded souls who could recover, but are under threat all the time from the ones above who are complicit with media, who just keep reinforcing that message that, oh, you're no good, you're damaged goods, and if you start to remember and realize that you're linked to this horror in some way, then the suicide program kicks in, and we're going to lose a lot of good people. I mean, this has got to stop. We've got to get the message out there, and so I'm doing what I can to do that, because it is enormous, and just this messaging, it's all one person on an island, he's dead, so let's forget about it. No. That's all deception.
So, your family members were steeped in this, which is fascinating. How did they justify putting you into the program as a kid?
They never talked about it. So I don't know. I don't remember my mother. I barely do. What I have, I've put in the Sparky book.
You must have contemplated why they possibly did it, and what does your instinct tell you?
Well, my instinct told me that my mother had been treated in the same way, and her brother, my uncle, who was one of the founders of the NSA, I think that he was also a abused and programmed person. He was a genius and but I didn't know any of this until really just when I was in my late 50s and 60s, when I just started researching this. I started using Ancestry, and I did gene tests, and I did all kinds of everything I could do to find out who on earth I was, and what I was connected to, and my question was always, why was I in ceremonies and rituals where other children died, and they didn't kill me? They hurt me. It terrified me, but they didn't kill me. And so I was looking for that. I suffered terribly from survivor's guilt, and that had a lot to do with my impulse later to start rescuing children all over the world, and that's what I did in Russia, creating an underground railroad that rescued. By the time I'd been doing this for 20 years, um, we'd rescued over 70,000 children. And by developing a system for police, not just in Russia and the former Soviet republics, but in North Africa and in Central Asia and in Europe, ways to connect with trafficking victims and get one, as they used to just get one, but you could get one and work with that child, that teenager, that young person, and go get the rest of them. So, so it was a real shock to me. Was that so? I wasn't surprised that this was happening in Russia. Um, Other countries, other places, and I was always told, America was was the best, perfect, nothing happened here. And as I started to work in Russia, I got funding from the State Department, from the Trafficking in Persons Office. In fact, I was one of their first grantees, and I realize now that Trafficking in Persons Office only exists to create a report that tells everybody that the United States has no trafficking problem. So it's all just cover up. So they were quite happy to give me funding so that I could do a survey from one end of the former Soviet Union to the other and see how much trafficking was going on there, because nobody knew. Nobody knows now in this country. So I organized a chat room that went from Vladivostok to Kaliningrad over 11 hours, and sent out questionnaires that I developed with a foundation in Seattle. And it's in the book, but it was quite a thing because there wasn't even any mail. So all these questionnaires had to go by bus and pig truck and train, and somehow they all got out there to university internet centers, and people came for hours and days and to get to the centers to talk about what was going on in their villages. And these are villages, lots of them didn't even have telephones. So over 11 hours, we heard from nearly 3,000 people who came in and chatted on the chat room and gave information and then filled out the questionnaire. And then by the time we got all the questionnaires back, that was 500,000 data points we had. The amount of trafficking was just stunning. And in addition to all the information on how people were trafficked, we also got the information on who was doing it, and we got the information on where they were going, where they're being sent. And the top three were Germany, Israel, and the United States, like way off the top. And I thought that, okay, the tip office will want to know this. State Department will want to hear this. Well, they didn't. And I went to the US, I went to Washington, I went to New York. I spoke at the UN and gave all this data. I mean, you can't argue the data. It was in my hands. I went to Congress, I went to State Department, went to the tip office, and nobody was interested. And that was my first experience of watching people just turn away and refuse to look at something. And I thought it was like ignorance on their part, or I couldn't figure out why. Now I understand. They're freaking complicit. I had just ripped the Band-Aid off their cover up. I wasn't supposed to go out there and discover that the United States was one of the world's biggest human transporters of humans who didn't want to be transported. And so I'm almost amazed I got out of there alive. But there it was, and it's still there, and they still got the data, and they still published the tip report and denied there was any trafficking, even though this is their own study that they've funded. So I just kept doing it. Got more cooperation from Israel, interestingly, and one of Ron Dermer, who now is the Israeli ambassador, came to one of our presentations or met with me after one, and he arranged for me to speak to people from the Knesset, who then came to my office in Moscow, and actually worked out systems for returning Russian trafficking victims and Russian children from Israel. And so I had the Israeli Knesset on speed dial, but I couldn't get any attention or cooperation from American law enforcement, American Congress, and we were documenting the flights. We knew when they went. We knew where they went. They went to Brighton Beach and they went to Virginia Beach. They could have done something, and they did nothing. And so that was my first hint. There was a big problem in this country, and that it was all a lie. And I didn't realize how much of my own life was a complete lie until I came back to the States in 2010 and I wanted to do a coast-to-coast survey in the United States. Why not? Is this so difficult? Especially, we're not doing it on watermelon trucks like I had to do in the Soviet Union. It's just people fill out computer forms. But anyone that tries to collect data on the transport of humans who don't want to be transported gets shut down. And I got shut down over and over and over, getting, I won't go into all that, but it isn't that I haven't kept trying. And I also want to create a computer map, because people can go into a map, can mark the place where this is happening, and provide information that can then be used to set up citizen grand juries. There's no reason. We're not helpless. We are just oppressed, and we're distracted by things like Epstein, thinking, oh, he's the problem. We solved that. The problem solved. No, the problem is that we are systematically, mentally repressed. You've got the 300,000 people who went through the program, and this includes GATE, GATE, the various cults. All these things were funded through the same mechanisms, through the CIA and the MK Ultra programming, and then denied. Everything was denied. But so, Shaun, can you bring up the documents, because they just quietly released this December 23rd, 2024. And for all the people who've spent their entire life knowing that something had happened to them, but not knowing what it was or who did it,